Okay, so the environment is pretty similar to the previous demo. We have the Boston and the Chicago side. It's the same database, DB Boston and DB FRA 25-ish. We have a RAC database on the primary. We have a RAC database on the standby. The database has just been upgraded to 1911, and we still have the old Oracle Home present on all the nodes on both sides. So what do we need to do now in order for the downgrade to happen? Well, first, we shut down all except one instance on the primary database because the downgrade happens with cluster database set to false. Then we start up the remaining instance in downgrade mode, and we can then use the db downgrade script to downgrade the data dictionary on the primary database. Notice that redo apply is still happening on the standby database. Because this is a very crucial step. After the downgrade has completed on the primary database, you should ensure that all redo from that operation is transported to and applied on the standby database. Do not continue until all redo is applied on the standby database. This is very important. Very important. Okay, we verified that. What we do now is that we shut down the instance on the primary database, and we then bring it up in upgrade mode in the lower release in the 12.102 home. And we do the same with the standby database, but here we can keep all the instances running. Then we reload the data dictionary. We use the script cat reload to reload the data dictionary in the old release. When that happens, we can start all the remaining instances on the primary database. Redo will then be transported and applied to the standby database. And now the downgrade has completed, you can start to use the database in the old release again. But we need to see it in action. We need to see a demo. So let's get on with it. First, we need some preparation work. I'm connected to Boston 1, which is on the primary site. We can see here it's running 1911. We can verify the Data Guard config. And as you can see, it's a container database with one PDB. First, we have to wipe out the unified audit trail. You cannot downgrade if there are records in the unified audit trail. So wipe it out from all containers and then set the cluster database parameter to false. Then we stop the primary database, all instances. You can see no instances are running on the Boston side, on the primary side. So now we can proceed with the actual downgrade. We start up one instance of the primary database in downgrade mode. And also we open all PDBs in downgrade mode as well. Then we set the executable flag on the downgrade script and then just call the downgrade script, db downgrade. It starts, and in the meantime, you can switch to another session and go to the logging directory and find the cat downgrade log file, and you can simply do a tail on it if you want to monitor the progress. After a while, the downgrade completes. We connect to the database and do a few log switches, and we can now see that the primary database is on sequence 25. Now we have to ensure that all the redo is applied on the standby database, so we will switch to Chicago 1 on the standby side, and we can see here that sequence 25 has been received and applied on the standby database, so we are good to go. We now can shut down the primary database. We shut down the standby database, all instances as well. And now we can finish the downgrade. It happens in the lower release Oracle Home. So I'm connected here to Chicago 1, the standby side, and I do the SRV CCL downgrade. So Clusterware will now start the database in the old Oracle Home. This is what happens here with the start database. Since I've done the downgrade, it now happens in the 12201 Oracle Home. And then I start redo apply. Now I switch to the primary site, Boston 1. I set the environment, connect to an instance and start it up in upgrade mode, and only one instance of the RAC database on the primary database. And I also open all the PDBs in upgrade mode. Then I create a directory where I can store the log files from the reload operation. I use catcon PL to execute the cat reload script in all my containers. When you do the downgrade or when you do the cat reload, it happens sequentially, so it takes one container at a time. After a while, it completes, and it can take a while. The reload happens sequentially. It does take a while to complete. Then I can again use catcon PL, this time to execute UTL-RP to recompile all the objects in the containers. And here I can process the containers, the PDBs, in parallel if I want. After a while, that completes as well. And the final thing that I want to do is to run data patch to see if there are any patches, any one-offs that needs to be applied to the database, because cat reload won't do that. But I had none in my case. There is nothing to apply or roll back. So let's connect to the database, set cluster parameter or cluster database to true to the SB file, and then shut down this one instance on my primary database. I set High Oracle Home as an environment variable because I have to do the downgrade from SRV CTL and the higher Oracle Home, and I then downgrade it to the old Oracle Home. So now Clusterware will start the database in the old release. I use SRV CTL to start the database, and it'll start all instances, and I can verify that by using SRV CTL status database. Let's connect to the database and ensure that all components in my container is either valid or option off. No rows means I'm good to go. And I can verify from read-over instance that the database has now actually been downgraded to 12.2. The primary database is currently on sequence 35. So let's switch to the standby database and ensure that it has caught up, that all the redo from the cat reload and recompilation and so forth has been applied on the standby database as well. Now back on Boston 1, I'll connect to Data Guard CLI and recreate my Data Guard config. First, I remove the old configuration and I create a new one. I set DB Boston as my primary database, and then I add an additional database, my Chicago database, as a physical standby. I enable the configuration, and now the Data Guard broker will ensure that the correct database parameters are set. I can use the show configuration command to see that my Data Guard config is as it is expected to be. Primary is Boston, and the Chicago side DBFRA something is the physical standby.